Yeah, to Robin and Dean, I just there was a lovely speed in your paper. Towards the end, the manifesto, towards the end, you talk about the rhizome, and you talk about it in fairly positive ways that it can be engendered. And I guess that given that you've got a particular political program with where you want to take photography, I wonder about the kind of, because the rhizome has no ethics. And when I go and do my gardening and I'm pulling out the rhizome and away from the little plants that are about to die, I really worry about that kind of the ethics of the rhizome. And I'm wondering how, because it has no care, and so I'm wondering how you negotiate that in your kind of use of the figure of the rhizome as a possibility for photographic practice.
Well, our point of departure in talking about the rhizome as part of a project that we've already undertaken about 18 months ago with an undergraduate photographic group, in which we used the idea of the rhizome as a concept to engage in work collaboratively over a semester. And part of that was informed by a kind of a reading of media ecological ethics, if you like. So it's a way of understanding your relation to various other processes beyond the individual, if you want, as an individual photographer. So that might be other humans, beyond, so working in groups, but also working in and in relation to technical processes, social processes. And I suppose our ethical stance, or our ethological stance, is very much informed by the idea of mediation and understanding that the rhizome is a problematic concept. It's utterly appropriated in terms of those logics of power that we were referring to, but as far as we're concerned, it's not necessarily something you can choose to say you're not part of, or you're part of, or you are. We're fundamentally rhizomatic in a 21st century media ecology, and so the ethics of that is a way of, or the implications for that ethically are, I suppose, based on learning to explore those relations more consciously, rather than assuming that it is possible to step outside of those processes of mediation. Does that make any sense?
I just have a very quick question, actually, for the same. Wait for the. Okay. When I first read the title, refraining, I thought it meant to refrain from, and I just wondered whether there was actually an implication in there, whether that was intentional or maybe just my misreading, because I thought it was interesting. No, it's interesting. To refrain from photography. No, that was all.
I have a question for Friedrich. I was interested, Friedrich, when you kind of thought. I was interested when you thought and you were wondering about thinking about the reason that manipulation was such a big deal at the birth of digitality, when photography has been a manipulation. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Okay.
Just develop that thought.
There is no such thing as. Does it work? Yes. Good. It depends on what you mean with manipulation. I would, in this discussion, I remember from those 10, 15 years ago, manipulation was always seen as some kind of bad thing. Somebody has the power and manipulates the image, and everybody believes, oh, this is real. And if you look through photography, and that was what I tried with the lecture, looking through photography, you always find this kind of traces that images are being made photographs, and on the one hand, on the other hand, profit from this kind of promise of photography, or what I dub promise of photography, that things are as they are photographed. And this kind of promise of photography, or the belief into photography, simply eradicates everything else, all kind of disturbances, that the images are brown, that they are so small, and nobody is that small. Yeah, so, and all that kind of stuff, and so all that gets away. So what I think is that photography necessarily is a transformation, is a manipulation of what we see with our naked eyes, whether we wear glasses or not. But there's always a difference too. And this kind of difference gets sort of lost in the process all the time when we talk about photography. Most talk about photography is talking about photography, not about photography, but about what photographs show. And I find that strange. And that was why I was starting to think why, if not all photographs are manipulated, or manipulations, put it like that. It's, yeah.
Just to carry on that point that you were just making, I was wondering if you'd spent any time with Errol Morris's Believing is Seeing, is the recent book, well, not recent, it's a couple of years old, in which he dissects a number of photographs, and one of which is some of the WPA projects from the American Dust Bowl of Ansel Adams' work, and using the photograph as an indexical justifier for a reality or a truth, that he spends an amazing, exhaustive analysis belying in a very kind of amusing kind of way that this question of indexicality, the photograph's nature, resting there, seems very much in conjunction with what you're talking about there.
I missed that yet, but to maybe just to add one more word about those kind of concepts. I believe there are indexical photographs, but I think they are the absolute exception. They have next to no indexical photographs. And so the concept of indexicality, which is from Peirce, as you all know, is kind of the point-for-point relation between the object and the image, is rather, in my eyes, some kind of concept that tries to make photographs true, and less something which describes photographs. And which is just the absurd explanation to, or my explanation to that mostly is that the print usually is the only the indexical relation a print has is only the one to the negative and not to the object that got photographed. So, which I think makes indexicality a little bit questionable.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. I just wanted to direct a question to Dean and Rob. Starting with the beginning of your speech or your talk, when you say, a post-medium photography might make perceptible or betray our common reframes. And from this, we can talk about a political practice. I just would like to suggest that could we speak about post-medium photography and post-medium art as another form of the death of art, and perhaps in a self-reflexive way ask ourselves whether art itself should give way to direct activism. In other words, are we engaging in a kind of self-indulgent refrain that prevents us from direct activism?
Well, we have a concept of the aesthetic, and we oppose that to a concept of the anesthetic. So we're arguing that the refrain is this, it can serve both of those kinds of motivations. So there is, there's a role for art there, which is to render us to the aesthetic, to make our encounter with the world painful again. You know, and that's I think that links into what Barbara was saying about the image being of the real that brings us into the real. So and that really hinges at the notion of fabulation as well. So we play around with the two senses of fabulation. The Bergson fabulation is anesthetic, this way of anthropomorphizing the world, rendering it lifelike, as an antidote to the anxiety that comes with being intelligent and conscious and rational and so on. And then there's Deleuze's reworking of fabulation as precisely flipping that over. It's an aesthetic encounter, a creative encounter with the world. And so art has that crucial function, which is political, ethical, and all those other things as well.
Andy?
It's a question for Mark, and it's about where you draw the line between the non-human and the human. So then, I agreed with your last kind of formulation with which you ended the paper by saying that some kind of attention to this field of the history of technology would be productive of itself insofar as it is a kind of another that's gathering force and might provide grounds for understanding other others. And I think that it's also really productive, the analysis of such uses of photography as diagrams. I think, but this is where my kind of concern comes in, and I wanted to ask you about it. So what you've done seems to produce a really good and interesting anti-humanist account of photography through this account of these particular institutions of the uses of photographs. That I find to be really compelling. But then you say, there's, you know, given the weight of the discourses involved, that it's this kind of sort of human ergonomics discourse, then I begin to be slightly concerned that there's it might be going too far to say it's a sleight of hand, that you're producing this great anti-humanist critique of photography, but precisely by cutting off what I might think of as the extension into kind of aspects of non-humanity in the very kind of social institutions, histories, human practices in those discourses. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. The impetus for this entire project, which is a larger history of human factors and ergonomics, was sort of the idea of a contribution to what I see as the burgeoning non-human studies, right? But coming from a slightly different position, whereby it's not that we continue to look for object A, B, C, and D that isn't human but has agency in a particular way, right? Contributing to what Latour calls democracy of things, right? Like that, like we continue to add identities that are non-human as, oh, well, but they're agential in some way. I was really taken aback by the fact that within this scientific discourse of ergonomics and human factors, it is precisely the inundation with the figure of the human, that in every technological system, the observation is, where's the human element? Where's the human? What component is the human? Always variable, always changes from experiment to experiment. And yet, it is such a great indicator of the threshold between, right, what is being defined as the human and what is non-human, right? All right, understanding that underlying all this are these theoretical positions such as cybernetics and information theory that render any uniqueness to human agential qualities null and void. So I don't know if that answers your question, or clarifies my position at all. But I guess I don't know exactly what is it that you think I'm cutting off or neglecting or being inattentive to, perhaps?
Well, I mean, it's just a fateful tendency in that kind of non-human discourse.
Right.
I mean, there's sometimes I get a sense that there's just a really kind of basic decision that's made before the start of the whole theorization that, okay, we know what's non-human because we already have an idea of the human. And that's not argued. It's not kind of given an account of, other than through the mediation of some technological agency.
No, I do. I understand that. I mean, it is as if, it's a stopgap because there really is no other way into a discussion like that, I don't think. But in order to have some grounds, right, to be intelligible to other people who may be on the spectrum of humanism or whatever, you need to have a commitment to what you think is excluded from the realm of the human or repressed, as Stiegler, right, has written opuses on, you know. So